Okay, we should be live.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Random Respawn where we talk about gaming news, gaming things, and gaming stuff. I'm Vajasha Raptor.
He's clearly in
Over
his usual home office that's brightly lit and well set up.
yes, um Vajasha Raptor over there is Calebite, and
Hello.
I just moved, so I apologize for any audio issues, me having to hold the microphone, and terrible lighting in here. Um,
But it's
but yes,
okay
this
because we've
is
got Wallace. All is well.
Wallace. What's up, guys? Rex, how you guys doing? It's good to see you guys.
Trex
Um,
King, what's up?
and so I literally just moved in yesterday. So this isn't even like I've been lazy the past week. I just moved in. Um, oh yeah, we're good, man. Like I said, just some big changes moving in. Oh, I forgot to put my headphones on. Dear God. If you guys can hear Caleb through the mic,
I
let me
haven't been
know.
able to hear me through you yet, so it's been okay.
All right. So enough lollygagging. Let's get to the topic at hand, and that is time mechanics in games. And I wanted to kind of ask us, the two of us, and kind of think about games that have done it really well, but not so much where a game just has a day and night cycle, but games where time is kind of like an integral part of the game, where it's Silent Hill 2 kind of comes to mind, but not really, because I feel like it turns to night and day after like events kind of trigger it. Uh, so it's I think it's a little bit more scripted, but like a game that I think that everyone thinks about right away is Majora's Mask, and
Right.
so
Right.
into like Majora's Mask and time mechanics. But I guess as a broad overall question, do you think that I know some people think time mechanics are a gimmick and they create stress in a game that isn't necessarily warranted. So like in Pikmin, the first Pikmin game, that clock was really stressful, and I know, well, Marshall isn't here today, but he couldn't play. He literally cannot play Pikmin because it stresses him out so much. I didn't know whether you think that time is just like it's like, oh, we'll just tack it on to create a false sense of tension, or if it I mean, I feel like, or if it just kind of comes down to the game, or kind of what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. What's up, Aunt Honey? Welcome to the podcast. It is interesting to think about, and there are a number of games that have used time in built around it in different kinds of ways. So I didn't play Pikmin. I do have some experience with Majora's Mask, and I know that was always. I really liked the mask collecting bit of Majora's Mask, and I love like getting the different powers and like the like progression of your character that you got through the masks. But I hated the time gate because I didn't really, when I was younger, first playing through, I didn't understand like the nuance behind resetting the world and like knowing that you had to have a goal in mind each time you started the game. Like, okay, this cycle I'm gonna go get this mask and this mask, and you do that like in one go through, and then you finish those things to their end, and then you reset the world and do other stuff. So like I didn't understand that nuance, and I was like, I don't like this. I don't like the game restricting the way that I play the game, because I mean, if anyone's watched me play something on stream, like Prey is an excellent example of how I do this. I just don't do what I'm supposed to do at all. I'm like going all around everywhere, I'm doing everything out of order and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I definitely waste a whole lot of time when I play through games. So having something when that construct where it's like, no, you need to really focus and go do something specific within this amount of time. It was weird for me. And I know Corey could never get into Majora's Mask for the same reason, because he hates being restricted by time. And Dead Rising is another game that kind of did
Oh,
a
Dead Right.
similar.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, they did another build around time kind of thing. And with Dead Rising, you're not supposed to do everything or beat everything, or even I think like be successful really the first time through, because every time you go through the game, then your character levels up and you keep a lot of the upgrades and you get familiar with the map layout and all that stuff. So it's really supposed to be a multi playthrough kind of thing with this time constraint. And I think if it's done well, and a lot of people love Dead Rising, because it did do some of that well, and it creates tension in places where there wouldn't normally be. Like you're sitting there, like you might normally be annoyed by an extra NPC dialogue or something, but in a game where you've got the clock racing against you, you're actually like stressed because these NPCs won't shut up, and you're like, no, like my time's running out, we gotta go. So it's interesting.
Just like in our lives, time is very important. So I feel like when games implement time, there's already a factor of stress to it. And even if you get like a game like Breath of the Wild or I mean, yeah, actually I'm specifically thinking of Breath of the Wild or Skyrim or more of those open-ended games where you just have a day-night cycle. Sometimes things are affected. Like maybe an enemy will spawn at night, but it's not so much as like Dead Rising, where the game will always end at this time no matter what you did, whether you did it well or poorly.
Right.
And same thing with the first Pikmin. And so some would say in the first Pikmin they kind of went a little far because if you didn't have enough of your ship before the end of the 30 days, like that was it. You lost the game. It's not like you had a new game plus, kind of like where Dead Rising is. And so I feel like Dead Rising did a really good way to mitigate some of that stress because it is supposed to be played multiple times.
Hmm.
Um,
I didn't know that about Pikmin. I never played the Pikmin, so that's crazy.
yeah,
It
yeah,
just
you
ends.
lose the game. So like if you're like on day 20 and you've got like 3 pieces of your ship, you're like, that's it. I might as well just hard restart. And then in Pikmin 2 and 3, they still had the same day night cycle, but it wasn't as you could stay on the planet as long as you wanted to. So you could take 100 days to find one piece, whereas in the first Pikmin, you could not do that.
Hmm.
And watching speedruns of the first Pikmin, you're like, how did I ever lose this game? Um, but they've been playing that nonstop. So you've got games like that where time is, uh, and it's actually like it's really bad. But then you have games kind of like on the other side of the spectrum that are I would say like mine because I played that a lot.
Well,
Whereas a
we
day
cut
will
out.
end and you
Didn't hear the
oh you
game
do
you
oh
said.
cool have to choose how you want to spend a day. And I feel like, I mean, it's really stressful. Do you spend it with your friend or do you spend it with the lady chick or do you spend it studying? And it's kind of like in real life, whereas like, you're not going to do well on the test unless you study, or you're going to lose this physical competition unless you do some strength training. You're not going to have friends unless you try and have friends. And so I was able to balance my life in Persona way better than I could in real life, as you can tell by the crappy lighting in this room. Um, it was one of those things where super stressful, but at the same time, you kind of got used to having to make sacrifices in the game, and it wouldn't necessarily break the game. I mean, it was very hard to do nothing in a day, whether or not you spent that time making or doing a trait that you wanted to level up was different than actually breaking the story and completely messing up your game. And so that wasn't the case at all. You just maybe next time you play through, you want to be better friends with Ryuji as opposed to, building up your charm. And so it's really kind of neat in that game where time it is a linear function, no days repeat, you're going through the calendar, and it also creates kind of like this game over. If you do not beat the boss within a certain amount of time, the game will end and you have to start over. Or you have to go back in time an X amount. But they make it in such a way that you kind of want to defeat the boss early, but if you did defeat the boss of a certain area early, halts until those X amount of days pass before like the intended thing happens. And I didn't know this because the first boss I faced, I beat him on the very last day that I could beat him. And very next day he confesses and things are good. The second boss, I beat him early, but I still had like 7 or 8 days left. And then it was basically the characters were like, "We haven't heard anything yet." And they were kind of freaking out because as the end date became closer and the guy still hadn't confessed, the NPCs were like freaking out. And so was I. I was like, "Did I miss something? Should I have done something else?" Nice to like also beat it quickly and then have those 8 days that were kind of like, I guess, less stressful because I knew that the boss was defeated, but I didn't know what would happen until that key date came. And once when that came, he ended up confessing, and everything was good. But it was just a really neat way to do time. So it's, what kind of person are you? Are you the type of person to do homework on a Friday night so that way you have the weekend free? Or are you normal and doing homework Sunday night or even Monday on the bus before class? And
Always
I think
Friday.
that's
Always Friday.
way.
Always Friday. Yeah, in
Oh
college,
man.
I don't guess you Marshall lived with me. He can attest to this. I every so in college I always structured it where I had like the least amount or no classes on Friday, and then I would get home from class on Thursday and do as much homework as I could stand Thursday night, even if I didn't have class on Friday. And then if I did, I'd come home Friday, get everything done, so then I could just do nothing for Saturday and Sunday, and it was amazing. So yeah, always got
That
homework done Friday.
that is really impressive. That is, I do not have that.
Yeah, that's a good example though. I haven't really played any I haven't played any of the Persona games. Was there any there is interesting time use in Catherine, or was that less around the time?
So Catherine was yes and no. So you could basically maximize the interactions that you had inside of the bar that you would go to. And Catherine was one of those, I feel like that would skew more on the Pikmin side, whereas
Mm,
that time will always increment no matter what, and it just depends on who you can talk to and kind of what you can do in the game. Uh,
gotcha.
but basically, if you fail a boss or anything like that, you replay that night and you
Hmm.
just kind of get a better idea of what the layout of the land was and all of that other stuff. So Catherine, I would say, is kind of like Pikmin in the sense that the days would progress no matter what. But at the same time, in Pikmin, you could actually lose the game, whereas Catherine, you may just get like a not so great ending because you will have to beat the game. It's not like Dead Rising where it kind of restarts and you have all these things going forward. It's like you will defeat the final boss and there will be a cutscene at the end of it. Whether or not you used your time, people, when you're supposed to talk to them, and the best way to do that depends on one of the endings that you get. So
Hmm.
it encourages multiple playthroughs because there is a karma meter, but it's not like getting the bad ending isn't beating the game. Whereas like in Pikmin, if you don't get off the planet, you just did not beat the game. Like
You
you,
lose.
you
Yeah. Yeah, it's over. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I think that there's a lack of games that really utilize time in the grand scheme like that. Just maybe not even well, but just in general, I think that we don't have a lot of those, and I think because it's just a very different kind of game, and I don't know that there's shown to be as big of a market for it. I think the Shenmue games also use time pretty well, like doing your daily chores, and I think there's some time usage in there. I again haven't played Shenmue. I was just reading about some of that. Um, but yeah, it's interesting that we don't have more like that. But sometimes games that aren't about time at all around the build can use time in either ways to encourage extra microtransactions, or can just time gate you with
Oh,
things, or
interesting.
there's lots of ways that games can use time for evil as well.
Right.
So
So
go ahead.
it's not a story, it's more of a gatekeeping aspect of it.
Right. So one example is actually an article that I wrote for Random Respawn a few years ago. Was for
The Phantom Pain?
yeah, Metal Gear Solid
Yeah.
5, The Phantom Pain, which is is really fun to play, and there is some usage of time with the sneaking around the open world. There is day-night cycles, and the guards will change depending on the times of day, and so you can actually sit there and smoke your e-cigar and pass time, and it's a really cool effect. And so there is some usage of time in the actual gameplay. But then after you do your missioning and you go back to base, you can develop upgraded weapons, or build extra pieces onto your base to be able to get more upgrades or more troops or whatever. All of your expansion type stuff is around this base building aspect, and the base building is all counts down in real open game time. So if you want to build an add-on to your base that takes 2 hours, that's not just 2 hours from hitting go and you can turn the game off and come back to it in the morning. It's 2 hours the game has to be open and running. But then they also have this morality system with your troops on the base, where if you're doing nothing for 2 hours, your troops think that you hate them because you're not giving them attention. They're like freaking Tamagotchi troops in this game. So it's like
Oh my
the
God.
game, it's this, they intention like built all of this around it, and it is really frustrating for me, where I'm like, okay, I can't build this thing because I have to wait 2 hours and I have to leave the game open, but then my troops are going to get demoralized because I'm not going to check on them because my game's literally just idle so I can build this thing. And then later on it gets even worse, where like you can get attacked in your base if you're idle. And so it's like they really, the way that they built that in was clever but really frustrating for me.
So a game like Animal Crossing, where it is
Mm.
completely and absolutely time dependent, but it's time dependent in a different way, in the sense that it's meant to be played a lot, a little, which is kind of a weird way to say it. But I mean, you log in at night to try and catch a lightning bug, or you play when it's raining in game to try and catch the coelacanth. So it's very time dependent. What you do during the day matters. On New Year's, if you play on New Year's, there'll be fireworks. If you play on Halloween, you get candy.
It's
It's,
have you played Stardew Valley? Isn't that similar to what Stardew Valley does?
Stardew Valley is not that way. Stardew
Oh,
Valley
okay.
actually has the day and night cycle are just part of the game. They're not real time like they are in
Mm,
Animal Crossing.
okay.
Um, Wallace, get some sleep, man. Good luck with the surgery tomorrow, man.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
Wallace. Yeah, good luck with that. Definitely. Best of luck.
Absolutely.
Our
Let us know how.
thoughts are
Let us
going
know.
out to you.
Um, Yeah, so Stardew Valley is like you have like a stamina meter and you can kind of eat to make it kind of stay longer, but it is a sped up. So, and if you were waiting for something to grow, you can sleep through waiting for things to grow. So that's totally common.
Mm,
But at the same time, they've got like a year calendar, and they may be someone's birthday at a certain time, and so it's like, and you play the game multiple years, and so time is really important, but it's in-game time.
mm. Okay.
I guess it's like a sped up Animal Crossing in that extent. But
Gotcha.
when you pause Stardew Valley and you go back to it,
It's paused.
start off where you stopped. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not.
It
Yeah,
resumes where it was paused. Whereas with Animal Crossing, it's the cycle continues. Didn't they've done that with in like to a much lesser extent, but they've done some of that with only the foot doors. All right. Well, still it's any surgery is worthy of thoughts. So good luck to you and your wife. Take care. Get some sleep, my friend. Thanks for hanging out. Um to a much lesser extent, haven't the Pokemon games used something like that, where you can only catch certain types of Pokemon at night or during the day or stuff like that, where it's been kind of a time related mechanic? I don't even know if that's been based on real life time or in game time, but
it is in-game time, and I know they did that with Sun and Moon. They Depending on the game that you got, and I think the time that you played, there was a day and night cycle.
mhm.
They did not do that for Gen 1. Gen 1 was just like
Yeah, I
kind
know
of
Gen
weekly
1.
based.
Yeah, Gen 1 didn't do it at all. I know that, but I thought even in like Silver and Gold era, they started something like that, but maybe I'm wrong.
Think you could be right about that. I know in Pokemon Go, they just released an update where the weather and the time that you actually the time that you play is always kind of affected some of the things that you caught, but now
Mhm.
more so weather and time actually factor into what's out there. So if it's raining where you are, you're to find grass Pokemon, and it's awesome. I'm so stoked with like the
That
most recent update. Yeah.
Yeah, that was supposed to be in like the original. That was one of the things that was like talked about for the original launch of the game, I thought, right?
Basically, if the game launched the way it is now, over a year ago, not one person on the entire planet. Like it's so good at this point, but everyone who's high enough level is just so burnt out by the game,
Mm,
and you don't have that kind of like slow introductory of things in order to like build upon that knowledge. So it's at like a really weird area where it's like if you weren't playing since day one, a lot of the mechanics that they introduced seemed like it would be really kind of a lot to grasp if you just
mm,
jumped into the game.
right.
Um,
Yeah, so they're at a really, really interesting point with their player base where you got the extreme veteran and the extreme noob. Yeah,
Between there just isn't.
right.
I jump on every now and then. I'll go in spurts, but maybe now that I'm in my new place, there are a ton of new Pokestops and gyms and things like that. So I may try and take advantage of that, but I
Oh,
mean, yeah,
goodness.
it takes
Goodness.
real time mechanics and brings those into game, and then that kind of
Come
affects
here,
how you
buddy.
play, which is kind of neat. But
Come here.
back to what we were saying about like actually
Come here.
locking something behind a paywall, or necessarily just having time built into the game to stall is kind of a weird way to do it. The Phantom Pain didn't come to mind when you first started talking about that because there's no way to like bypass it with money. Whereas a lot of free to play games,
Well,
you can level up your person like 4 or 5 levels,
I
but
think
then
they're.
you've got to wait like full 24 hours. Oh my god, what is that?
Oh my god! I'm being attacked by a monster. Monster kitten. Um, there was some kind of microtransaction system in Phantom Pain, but I didn't really look into it very much, so I don't know.
Forget
I
that. I
don't
did
really know
not.
the extent. There was a microtransaction like coin system in that game. But yeah, a lot of free to plays, you'll be able to play one round, each round you play takes a life, and then you have to wait, 5 or 10 minutes to be able to get your, regenerate one of your lives, or you can pay $2 and get all your lives back. And so, yeah, that's definitely part of the free to play model. Um,
Sure.
I was also thinking of like Destiny. Destiny was a big time gate. Like a lot of the mechanics and your incentive to play were around time gates. One of the more interesting things that they did, um, uh, maybe midway through, certainly the last year of Destiny 1's life, was the special missions that were tied to a specific day. So if the daily heroic mission that would rotate around, if that showed up as a specific mission, you could do a secret objective in that mission to get like a special quest or a special exotic weapon if you did it that day, and then it wouldn't roll around for another like 2 months or something. So you needed, like, you were incentivized to do it right then. And that was a way to like bring time in and make it where you're like, oh god, I gotta log in today, like I gotta do this. And also just with the resets that they did on a weekly basis, your goal as a player was to earn all of the things that you could, do all of the checkboxes on the raid and the heroic strikes and the nightfalls and all of that, throughout the week, so that you could have all of that done by the weekly reset on Tuesday, and then it would start all over again. So it was like they used time as a way to keep the game relevant kind of for you.
So, I guess my next question is, at what point in development do you think that they start bringing time into the equation? You've got a game like Animal Crossing that is like fully time based,
Right.
where it's like that is core into the game, and you have Majora's Mask. But I mean, Majora's Mask could have been a great game, but without the time mechanic. I mean, if you strip that away and you just had the dungeons and the mask collecting and things like that, and essentially with the resetting of the 3 days, so you did lose items and things like that, but you didn't lose any key items.
I
You still have like a playable Zelda game. So it's kind of like one of those things like where, I mean, don't get me wrong, Majora's Mask is phenomenal because of the time mechanic and the way that they do these things. And
I was
then
gonna
a
say, I
lot of
think,
people think that it's purgatory and stuff like that. But
yeah, I was gonna say, I think it loses a lot of its soul if you take the time mechanic out of it, because that's what adds a lot of the stress and the foreboding and the moon crashing down and everything. Like, I think that's a big part of what the game is. And you're right. I mean, if you take all of that away, you still have good dungeons and good items and like good just general Zelda play. But I don't know that it would have been as big of a like cult classic as it is today if you took away the time.
oh, you're absolutely right about that. But it was more of like a case of, do you think that they were like, we want to have a time mechanic in a Zelda game, or do you think that they
Hmm.
were just halfway through Majora's Mask and they were like, we need a little extra something, and then they added the time mechanic? Like, what do you think that
What do you
that
think
time
came
mechanic,
first? Which chicken or which egg?
which
um,
chicken or which egg?
Yeah.
This is kind of off topic, which we do normally, but do you ever feel guilty eating like chicken and eggs, or do you feel like you reunited them? Like I don't know. I'd rather have like
Reunited
steak
and
and
it
eggs
feels so good. Um,
than eggs. Personally, I don't know. That's one of those things that I just
yeah, that is interesting. I actually don't think I often eat them both in the same meal.
doesn't they don't really present themselves that frequently. I mean, unless you did like a salad where you have like a hard boiled egg and like cold chicken, where it like sneaks in
Yeah.
there. And the real question is, why am I eating a salad? But yeah, it's like I don't know. I just don't. Like to me, like it makes me feel like a little uncomfortable to eat both. I don't
I
know why.
that I'm trying to think about like where in this like storyboarding and development process the time discussion would come in, and I honestly don't know because like with because it could have been that way where like they're making Majora's Mask and you're building up the dungeons and building all of these things because I don't think there's any dungeon mechanics or anything core to that really matters with the time. Like there's no you have to be in it and complete it within like 1 day's passing or something. Like I don't think there's anything in that nature. Like they built the way that the items interact and all of this other stuff interact with the time in mind. But I would believe it if they're like, okay, here's the next Zelda game. It's like Ocarina of Time, and then that's some point when they've started developing, they're like, wait, this is just the same game. Like we need to mix it up somehow, and then decided to change it. But it wasn't like they built the game initially with the time in mind. Like with Animal Crossing, that game is the time is the whole game. Like that is when they're designing it, like here's our idea for the game. That is bullet number one. Like it's based on time. I don't necessarily think that it was that high in the priority on Majora's Mask, and certainly not as high on like the Metal Gear Solid and some of the other
Oh
ones.
yeah,
I don't. I
absolutely.
think that was like, oh, well, we need to restrict this somehow and make this, and then they get a development team working on the base building stuff, and they all need to be slapped. And
So, like, what about like Destiny? Because you said that. I mean, I know they always had like Zur coming on. Well, not always, but when they introduced Zur, like Zur would come in on Fridays, and then
yeah, no,
they would have.
Zur was from that was right from the very beginning. I think time gating and all of that was definitely very upfront in the development of that game because it was trying to be like they were trying to be, MMO light, and there's some time gating things in MMOs, and so I think that was a part of it that they had designed around pretty core from the beginning because the weekly resets and like the equipment earnings, and they had a cap on experience that you could gain on certain things during the week and daily
Oh,
bounties and all this
oh
stuff.
right.
So like there were big parts of the game that were all wrapped around the daily reset and the weekly reset being big points in the game. So I think that's always been one of their like core design pillars. And I'm sorry, I've got like cat hair flying all over me now because my cat came in to visit. That's why I normally lock them out during podcast time. Um, so we talked about Destiny and the Pokemon and some of the Metal Gear, some other games that I thought of that had a little bit of time play in it, not nearly substantially, but like Transistor was one that I was thinking of, where Transistor is a isometric action game, kind of a pseudo puzzle-y action game though. And so you've got a pseudo turn-based
Yeah.
movement that where you slow down time and you plan out your moves, and then you end the slowdown and she executes those moves, and then you kind of run around and wait for that to recharge and think about your move. So it's like this in and out of a turn-based like slow down time kind of thing to give you a different position. What are some other games that you can think of that have done that kind of thing where it's augmented by time, where the main game plays out in normal, but then you've got some kind of time to build a puzzle around or something like that?
There are two games that come to mind. You've got Prince of Persia,
Mm,
but that's a little bit more actiony.
yeah.
And I would say the time mechanic is more of a skill that you use and need to utilize at times, as opposed to like Transistor, where it's time and freezing the time is a way for you to figure out how to defeat the enemies. Whereas like Prince of Persia, it's kind of like, ah, crap, I got hit.
Mm.
or I fell down, or I need to utilize my special in some way or another. So I don't know if I really count Prince of Persia. I just know time is involved.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
what we're thinking of is the original Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic,
Mm.
where you would pause the game, you just hit spacebar, and you could cycle between your characters, choose which attacks you wanted them to do, and then basically unpause and watch them do that. I mean, you could play the game and never pause it and never kind of strategically play out the game played, but then also like freezing time, planning out, like losing in the middle of a battle, freezing it again, deciding, all right, you need to throw the potion, you're not doing any damage, and then that sort of aspect
Hmm.
kind of same time, whereas Transistor freezing the enemy and plotting out your next course of action, that had a meter that would diminish, so you basically had to plan out the best move that you could and then hide until it rebuilt. Whereas in Knights of the Old Republic, you were always free to freeze the game. Like that was
Mm.
part of it, was to kind of like pause it, assess the battlefield, and go from there.
Hmm.
So I don't know if that counts either. I don't know. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, that's kind of like what the is it They Are Billions, I think, is the like the new
They are
hotness
built.
top
Yeah.
down strategy zombie defense game. And that
Yes.
is, it's set up in that kind of like RTS style where the overview and the base building and the unit control, but you can just pause the game and then plan out your moves for all of your different units so that it makes the requirements of your speed, like your APM and your ability to micromanage and macro manage at the same time. It reduces the burden of that, because you can just pause and then do all of your separate actions at once and then resume the game, which I thought was a really nice addition to that kind of game in that genre. Because like that's my APM is horrible, and that's one of the things I could never do in RTS games, is just being able to do both. I could do the
StarCraft.
StarCraft, I'm awful at it because I can do the macro or I can do the micro, but I can't do both at the same time. So being able to pause the game and do some little stuff, that I thought was a really good way to mix it up and use time to the benefit of the player.
I mean, that also, I mean, I thought of like, at the attack gauge in Final Fantasy VII, but before then, like
Oh yeah.
true turn-based strategy games, do you think that that is a purposefully done time mechanic at that time, or do you think that was kind of a limitation, or that was just expected of the genre, turn-based strategy? Which, fun fact, didn't actually originate with JRPGs. It originated in the States with Dungeons and Dragons, the role-playing turn-based games. They actually made
Hmm.
a Dungeons and Dragon game in the West that had that mechanic, and then it was kind of adopted in Japan, and then just the default go-to, and they kind of expanded on it. Whereas, like in the West, they kind of like that was fun for a little while, and then they moved past it. So that was something interesting that I learned.
Yeah, I
But
think I think the turn based is an interesting, like you can kind of see the evolution of the like in game designers, the process that they went through, because like you said, it started with Dungeons and Dragons, and like, okay, here's a tabletop game that people really like and can get into, and like here's a concept that we want to translate to the digital world, and what's the best way to do that. And with the hardware limitations and everything back at the time, it was just easiest to do, okay, you decide turn, they decide turn. It was like this hard. But then as games got more complicated and we got better and players got better at learning mechanics, it gradually went away from the true turn to turn to turn to then like, okay, yeah, it's turn based, but if you take too long, then the enemy's going to smack you in the face, or other consequences around that. So I think it's been an evolution of that. But there are some games that continue the purposeful, it's your turn, it's enemy's turn, like Darkest Dungeon. There's no, if you're on your turn and you don't do anything for 2 hours, the game's just going to sit there and it's on your turn for 2 hours. Like there's no, it doesn't matter. It's you take your turn, the enemy takes their turn, because there are other factors and status ailments and things that play into the turn order. And so the turn order is very purposeful in that game, and there are moves that you can do to slow down enemies or speed up your characters to make sure that they attack first or the enemies attack first, to do that kind of stuff, because positioning and timing is extremely important. So they kind of used that it's going to be your turn, it's going to be their turn, but then there's variance in the turn order to kind of keep that mixed up.
For sure. So, yeah, so it's I mean, like, I don't it's kind of weird because I feel like turn-based strategy games almost fall into their own thing because although time is an extremely important aspect of it, it's almost like the time isn't part of the story. And so I wonder
Right.
if like real time based games or games with time mechanics baked into the story kind of like to the general idea of what people mean when they say time mechanics in a game.
Yeah, so that's interesting you bring that up, and I recommend that you check out Invisible Ink, which is a stealth game, and it's like a lot of it is it's pretty much turn based how you could think about it. Um, but there is a timer that passes within the game where if you take too long, the difficulty will continue to ramp up on the level. So like more cameras will turn on, guard locations or guard patrols will change. So it really adds a little bit of an extra stressor, but also adds the value of time and loot and exploration versus being able to get through. So it's like, okay, yeah, I can plan everything out like to the pristine, nth degree and go get all of the things on the map and explore every corner, but it's going to be really hard for me to get out and get out successfully. Or, I can kind of make it to the end and maybe do a little side exploration, but it adds a lot more of that time pressure without directly impacting the turn to turn kind of thing. So it's interesting how they kind of weave that in.
Yeah, I like that. That's a neat way to do it. So it's a timed turn-based
Yeah.
strategy game.
Yeah, kind of. um and then there's the games that are also built around time but in a much less stressful way, and like Braid, that's one where the whole game is about time, and
That's true.
each world that you're in is your character interacting with time in a different way, which was really, really cool. Great puzzle game. And then there's games like Singularity, which is a first-person shooter game that has a time mechanic where you can, let's see, I think it was Singularity, and there might have been another one that actually I'm pretty sure there was, but you could like speed up. What was it? Time Stop? No, shit, I can't remember what the name is now. But you had time controls that you could do when you're playing the game. So like you could pause time and dodge around bullets from enemies and then resume time and speed up time to make them decay.
I mean, like Super Hot,
Oh
but
yeah, and Super Hot. That's a great one. Yeah, talk about Super Hot.
Super Hot, for those of you that don't know, is a game where it moves extremely. Time technically does move, but it moves extremely, extremely slowly when you're not moving. And so when someone fires a gun, if you stop moving, you can basically see the bullet's trajectile and see where it's going to go and then decide how to counter it from there. And then once when you beat the level, it plays it in real time and shows you kind of like how you beat the level. And it's
It's
kind of neat
so
because you look like a super
satisfying.
cool ninja. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so satisfying to watch the level replay.
But that's a really interesting time mechanic. So it when you said braid made me think more of like the Prince of Persia method of
Mm-hmm.
using time in a game, whereas time is required to solve a puzzle as
Right.
opposed to time being a factor of story. I
Right.
mean, don't get me wrong, it is part of the story in both of them, but it's not so much like in Persona 5 or
It's
like
not it's not an accent so much as the core mechanic is time, and you have to use it in some way. It doesn't impact you and like maybe influence your decisions. There is a way to use time that will get you to the end goal. I think is that kind of what you're saying?
exactly that is the best way to say it. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I agree. I do agree that Braid is in that same kind of time usage as Prince of Persia. There's also been some cheeky uses of time from like achievement locking or actual Easter eggs. So Arkham City had the Calendar Man achievement where
That's right. And
you had
if
to
you talk to him every holiday or something, right?
Yeah, so there was one that was like you had to talk to him 1 year after like 365 days apart. So and then there's another one where yeah he had all the different holidays. So you had to log in on Halloween and talk to him then and New Year's, and so there were a couple achievements with that. And then also I was thinking of Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater with the end. So
Oh yeah,
the
the
old
old
guy's
sniper.
sniper boss, where if you set your system clock in the game, I don't remember what the increment of time was, but if you set it, 10, 15 years forward on your PS2, then the end would just die of old age, and you would circumvent that entire fight.
It's way so if you save the game in the middle of the fight and then came back the next day,
Mhm.
you would instantly be killed, and the end would say, "You never sleep on the battlefield," and, like, instantly kills you, like, that's how it starts. But if you waited a week, that's when you get the "he died of old
Oh, it was the
age."
week. Okay, that's
Right,
funny.
but, if you set it for 10 years, the same thing happens, but
Yeah,
yeah, it's
that's hilarious. And
yeah,
wasn't it
it's pretty
in
funny.
Sons of Liberty? Didn't they have real life ice melting like timing or physics or something in the game? Like there's an ice bucket on the ship, and if you sit there and watch it, it like melts in real time.
Yeah, they had, like, a developer dedicated to just making realistic ice melting and, like, yeah, but yeah, it's that was a feature. That like, they had to build an engine just to do that or something crazy.
Yeah, like very cheeky and pointless uses of time. Um, and there's
You've also
also oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, you've also got, like, the obligatory, "This is gonna explode, we need to escape in X amount of minutes," but, like, to me, that's not using time. That's just,
Yeah,
one-off, like, we're gonna falsely build tension, whereas, um, games where time is more of like there is tension because time is involved. There's always tension when time's involved, but it's not like, you know,
right,
use it's just you just start over at that day, whereas some of these other time-based mechanic games will start you either significantly the event occurred or you just lose the game.
right. It's really interesting with when games are trying to give you that sense of urgency and like time isn't a thing. You've got a first person shooter and it's like, oh my god, you've got to get there like right now, and the music cranks up and it's all like tense, but you can just not do it and walk the
It's
other
like
way and whatever. It's like it doesn't.
you need to save her, and you're like, all right, but there's about
Okay.
30 other side quests I'm gonna do
Exactly. It's
first.
like
Yeah.
Fallout. Like that was something that was in Fallout 3. It was like, oh, or maybe it wasn't 3, it was 4 or something. It was like, you need to go, you need to get there now. Like they need your help. I'm like, how about not? How about I go do this for like 3 days and then we'll make our way over there? Like it doesn't really have that urgency that it becomes very silly when you take it when you don't believe in that sense of urgency. You're like, nah, it can wait.
Yeah, but it's also that false sense of urgency, which I feel like makes it
Mm,
instantly a not time mechanic thing. You're absolutely right.
right.
I think the fake sense of urgency, we've all gotten to the point where we're like, we know that's not the case. Like unless you put a clock on top of the screen, we know it just doesn't matter. And
Right.
so really is just it's like it's almost like unless a game can do it well, which I don't know, it's gotten to the point where I can see through it. So I don't know if any game even does it well. I just know like, oh, I'm gonna do whatever I want anyways. Whereas, in Animal Crossing, if you forget to turn it on, you won't be getting presents from some of the guys. So it's like it actually matters.
Right.
Uh, I don't know, like that kind of stuff. I don't necessarily consider time mechanic, even though they purposefully try and give the illusion of there being a time limit.
Right. Yeah, it's like there hasn't been a commitment to working around time or to implementing it. So when you try to throw that in there, it is that false. It's like a jump scare. Like it's just a false sense of urgency. You're like, no, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really hold weight where it does in a game like Majora's Mask. You're like, ah, shit. Like I can't. I gotta get through this because the world's gonna end if I don't. You know. So it really has that built in. So it's interesting to see. There's a pretty wide gamut of time use in games. I was trying to think of a game that where you're saying like, oh, if you don't get here, like she'll die. And I was trying to think of one where they actually do, but it was unexpected, because I feel like that's happened in a game I played recently, but I can't remember. I can't place it.
Yeah, I feel like that was a thing too. Like where if well, I know that they're in like in games where it was more decision based, like where you made the wrong decision,
Right.
and then it plays out later on where you accidentally kill, like, oh, I should have made that decision. But I don't know if there is a secret in-game counter timer, and if you don't get to that person in time, they actually die, or there's some real consequence. I feel like
Right.
there absolutely has to be one, but I can't think of one off the
Yeah.
top of my head.
Yeah, I can't either, because there's some little side quest stuff in the newest Prey where it's like, oh, you need to. There were a couple of times where you've had a clear time requirement to save a person or do an objective, and the timer shows up on the screen, and you've got that amount of time before it fails. And there've been some other things where it's like, oh, you should go help them, and that doesn't have any time associated with it, so you can go do whatever you want. But I do feel like there was a game that I played or I heard of where you were given an objective to go do something, and if you just dilly-dallied for forever, by the time you got over there they were dead, or they had like been eaten by a zombie or something, so where it had actually changed to like, wait, oh shit. But I
That's
can't
funny,
place
yeah.
it. I know that it's a thing though, I just can't place it. I wish I could. I couldn't find it before we started the podcast. But my cats are telling me that it's about time to be over, because they're
Yeah, oh yeah, that's it, totally. Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't mind getting back to still moving in, but yeah. So time mechanics in games. Yeah, let's go ahead and recap it away.
Yeah, so we've talked about a pretty wide variety of games that use time in different ways. You've got the annoying time gated things like in free to plays or in Destiny. You've got the slightly more interesting but not super core use like Pokemon or Pokemon Go, where time is relevant to the actions of the things that are available in the world, but it's not super critical. And then you've got games where time is an assistance, like in your planning, for games like Transistor or Invisible Ink. Games that are built around time as the core mechanic, Braid, Prince of Persia, where you have to use time. And then games that add in that extra level of stress, like Majora's Mask and Dead Rising, where the game's on a timer, and if you don't, it doesn't matter what you do, or Pikmin, and if you don't, it doesn't matter what you do, by the end of the timer the game is over, and that gives you the result. So it's really interesting to see the different ways that we use time in games, and is just one other way that it differentiates the gaming platform from movies or books, because that's not something that can be interacted with at all in those forms, but you can in a video game, because you have an in-game timer, and versus and real world time can play into that. So it's really a really cool aspect of video games that I hope we get to see more evolution of in the future, because it's, like I said, it's just another really great thing that separates video gaming as a unique form of entertainment. So
That's
go
yeah,
ahead.
no, that's super cool. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's awesome.
So yeah, thanks everybody for hanging out with us today. We are Random Respawn. We do this every Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We stream on Twitch at We Are Random Respawn occasionally. We do random games, random shenanigans. I think now that Josh has moved, that should be a little more frequent. I don't know. We don't have a
A lot
schedule.
more. Yeah, it'll be a lot more frequent. I just need to get a desk. Been on my knees this whole time, which is why I've been shuffling like a crazy person. But
Oh, I
I'm
thought
not
you were.
actually on my knees.
I thought you were
Right.
standing. Oh goodness.
No, no, no. It's like, what are knees? I don't do that.
Oh man.
So yeah, I've got a couple streaming, editing kind of things going on in the brain, and hopefully I can make those come to fruition. Working on our guides for various different games. Yeah, and as I think my brother said probably best last week, we really appreciate all of the comments and the interactions during anything, the stream or streaming, podcasting, or even previous videos. And if you guys ever want us to talk about anything or have any ideas or topic ideas, we to talk about that, and then um, opinion on video games.
Yeah, absolutely. Last week we had the guest speaker, and that was great. And always welcome any topics or points of discussion, and we love chatting with you guys during the streams and during the podcast. So thanks everybody for hanging out. We are Random Respawn, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.